A summer night in 1968. The radio hums with Motown, the windows are down, and the smell of fresh gasoline lingers in the air. Neon signs glow over a drive-in diner. Chrome bumpers sparkle under the streetlights. For millions of Americans, cars weren't just a way to get from one place to another. They were freedom. They were fashion. They were family. The 1960s and 70s gave us automobiles that carried personality, machines that felt alive. From their engines to their ornaments, they reflected who we were as a culture. Today, we're rolling back the clock to explore 30 iconic car features from the 60s and 70s that defined an era. Some were bold, some were quirky, and some quietly disappeared, leaving behind nothing but memories. So buckle up, let's take a ride. 1. Tail fins and chrome dreams. If you've ever seen a Cadillac from the late 50s rolling into the early 60s, you know what we mean. Those tail fins stretched sky-high, like rocket ships on wheels. Designers were inspired by the space race. When America was looking to the stars, even our cars seemed to be preparing for liftoff. Chrome trim wrapped every curve, reflecting sunlight like jewelry. They weren't practical, they weren't efficient, but they were unforgettable. And when safety laws and changing tastes flattened those fins, many drivers felt something magical had been lost. 2. The front bench seat. Sliding into the front seat used to mean space, real space. Instead of two buckets separated by a console, you had one wide seat across the front. Families fit 3 across with no problem. Young couples sat close on date nights, sometimes steering with one hand, arm around their sweetheart with the other. By the late 70s, the bench started to fade, replaced by bucket seats for safety and design. But ask anyone who remembers, and they'll tell you, the bench seat wasn't just about seating. It was about closeness. 3. The magic of 8 tracks. Long before Spotify, there was the satisfying ka-chunk of an 8-track sliding into place. Suddenly, the car became your own personal concert hall. The Beatles, Elvis, Fleetwood Mac, you could take them on the road. Even if the track sometimes switched mid-song, nobody cared. For the first time, music traveled with you, not just on the radio's whim. 8 tracks eventually gave way to cassettes and later CDs. But for a whole generation, that chunky plastic cartridge was the sound of freedom. 4. Pop-up headlights. There was something futuristic about the way they rose with a mechanical whir, like eyes opening at nightfall. Cars like the Corvette or the Miura made drivers feel like they were stepping into the future. Kids loved watching them blink open. Adults loved the sleek look when they were tucked away. They fell out of favor in the 90s because of safety and design rules. But in the 60s and 70s, they weren't just headlights. They were a show. 5. Vinyl roofs. Vinyl tops were everywhere in the 60s and 70s. Black, brown, or even in rich colors, they made cars look like convertibles, even if they weren't. It was a little touch of luxury at an affordable price. You'd pull up to the diner, and your ride looked just a bit more special than the next guy's. Over time, vinyl roofs cracked and peeled under the sun, and the style faded. But in their prime, they shouted one thing loud and clear: style mattered. 6. Hood ornaments. Every hood told a story. Cadillac's Flying Goddess, Pontiac's Red Indian Head, Chrysler's Proud Eagle. They weren't just logos. They were sculptures, tiny works of art leading the way as you drove. Kids leaned over the hood, tracing them with curious fingers. By the 80s, safety rules began to phase them out, but collectors still treasure them, reminders of when cars had jewelry. 7. Wood grain panels. Station wagons were the heart of the American family car in the 60s and 70s. And the king of them all? The wood grain panel wagon. Fake wood down the side turned an ordinary family hauler into something that looked a little more, well, distinguished. Dads packed the back for road trips. Moms loaded groceries. Kids piled in, facing backward in the rear seat. It was suburban life, wrapped in faux timber. And though the wood wasn't real, the memories were. 8. Crank windows. It wasn't long ago that rolling down the window meant actually rolling. With a handle, by hand. There was something satisfying about the motion, the click of the gears, the breeze rushing in. Kids loved taking turns cranking them down in the back seat. Today, we tap a button. But back then, windows had a rhythm all their own. 9 cigarette lighters and ashtrays. It seems strange now, but every car once came with a lighter and ashtray built right in. Drivers sparked up without a second thought. Ashtrays weren't hidden. They were front and center, sometimes even in the back seat. It was part of the culture, like carrying a pack of gum. Eventually, health awareness pushed them out. But in the 60s and 70s, they were just as common as cup holders are today. 10. Floor-mounted high beams. If you drove at night back then, you remember it well. The little switch on the floor right next to the clutch. Tap with your foot, and the high beams lit up the road. No fumbling with your hands, no looking away. Just a quick stomp and the dark highway became daylight. Simple, practical, and strangely fun. By the 80s, they moved to the steering column, but for many, the floor switch was part of the joy of nighttime driving. Before we move forward, make sure to like and subscribe to my channel, The American Timeline. And don't forget to hit the all notifications button so you'll be the first to get America's nostalgic memories. So, let's get started and take a look. 11. Hidden gas caps. Back in the day, finding the gas cap could feel like a magic trick. Sometimes it was tucked behind the license plate. Other times, hidden in the taillight or disguised under a chrome flap. It wasn't just clever design. It kept the lines of the car smooth and sleek, without breaking the flow. Drivers loved showing it off at gas stations. Watch this. As the attendant scratched his head. By the 80s, practicality replaced playfulness. But in the 60s and 70s, a hidden gas cap was a little bit of automotive theater. 12. Rear-facing seats in wagons. If you grew up in a station wagon, you remember this one. That magical seat in the way back, facing the cars behind you. Kids waved at strangers, made faces at truckers, and sometimes even held up silly signs. Road trips felt like adventures, with your own private world in the rear. Sure, they weren't the safest and eventually disappeared. But ask anyone who sat back there. It was the best seat in the house. 13. CB radios. Breaker 19, Breaker 19. The Citizens Band radio wasn't just a gadget. It was a culture. Truckers, travelers, even families used CB radios to talk across the highways. Handles like Big Daddy or Sweet Pea gave everyone a nickname. Kids listened in with wide eyes, thrilled by the secret code of the open road. Cell phones ended it. But in the 70s, CB chatter was the soundtrack of the American highway. 14. T-tops. Somewhere between a hardtop and a convertible lived the T-top. Pop out the 2 glass panels and suddenly you had wind in your hair, but still the safety of a roof beam across the middle. Cars like the Pontiac Firebird and Chevy Corvette wore them proudly. They leaked, sure. They squeaked, yes. But they looked cool, and in the 70s that was everything. 15. The muscle car roar. There's no mistaking it. The deep, throaty rumble of a V8 muscle car idling at a stoplight. Mustangs, Camaros, Chargers, they weren't quiet. They weren't subtle. But they announced themselves like a lion in the wild. Gas was cheap, speed was king, and horsepower was bragging rights. By the late 70s, rising fuel prices tamed the roar. But for a decade, it was the heartbeat of American streets. 16. Hood scoops. Those bold openings on the hood weren't just for looks. They funneled air straight into the engine, promising more power, more speed. Even if you didn't race, having a scoop made you feel like you could. The car looked muscular, aggressive, alive. By the 80s, many became just decoration. But in the 60s and 70s, a hood scoop was a badge of performance. 17. Opera windows. Small oval or round windows near the back roofline gave cars a touch of elegance. Lincolns and Thunderbirds wore them like jewelry. They didn't add visibility. They didn't add function. But they added class. It was the disco era of design, when style mattered more than sense. And opera windows made every drive feel just a little more formal. 18. White wall tires. Clean, crisp, and unmistakable. A band of white around your tires meant you cared about presentation. In the 60s, white walls were everywhere, from family sedans to luxury rides. By the 70s, they grew thinner, slowly disappearing. Today, they're rare. But nothing said Sunday drive quite like a gleaming set of white walls on a freshly washed car. 19. Dashboard clocks. Long before digital time, dashboards carried tiny, ticking clocks. Some were elegant analog dials, others were futuristic digital flip clocks. They didn't always keep perfect time, but they made the cockpit feel refined. Eventually, quartz watches on wrists and later digital dashboards took over. But there was something comforting about glancing at that little clock as the miles rolled by. 20. Fender-mounted mirrors. In some imports, mirrors sat way out on the fenders instead of the doors. They looked exotic, straight from Europe or Japan, and gave drivers a different perspective on the road. Americans experimented with them too, but soon moved back to door mirrors. Still, for a moment in the 60s and 70s, fender mirrors made cars look sophisticated. Before we move forward, make sure to like and subscribe to my channel, The American Timeline. And don't forget to hit the all notifications button so you'll be the first to get America's nostalgic memories. So, let's get started and take a look. 21. Ashtrays in the back seat. We already talked about front seat ashtrays, but many cars even had them in the rear. Fold-down trays with lighters built right in, as if the kids would light up after Little League. Sounds shocking today, but it was normal back then. Times change, but those ashtrays remind us how different the culture once was. 22. AM radios with giant dials. Before FM ruled the airwaves, AM radio was king. Big chrome knobs, glowing orange dials, and the hum of stations fading in and out as you drove cross-country. Late at night, you could pick up voices from hundreds of miles away. Felt mysterious, almost magical. And though FM eventually stole the stage, AM gave many their first taste of music on the move. 23. Handwritten dealership stickers. Buying a new car meant driving away with a dealership name proudly painted or stickered on the trunk. It wasn't branding, it was a signature, a reminder of where your car came from, and a free advertisement for the dealer. Most faded or were peeled off, but for a while they were part of every car's story. 24. Push-button transmissions. Some cars ditched the gear shifter for a panel of buttons. It felt futuristic, like piloting a spaceship. Just push drive, and off you went. The idea didn't last long. Mechanical complexity and customer confusion killed it. But for a moment, it felt like the future had arrived. 25. No seatbelts or just lap belts. It's almost unthinkable now, but many cars in the 60s didn't have seatbelts at all. And if they did, it was often just a simple lap belt. Families piled in, kids bouncing around freely in the back. Safety wasn't the focus, comfort and freedom were. By the late 70s, regulations changed everything. But the memory of riding beltless down a summer highway still lingers for many. 26. Cigarette vents, vent windows. Before air conditioning was standard, cars had little triangular vent windows in the corners. You'd flip them open and fresh air poured in. Smokers used them to flick ashes. Kids leaned on them during long drives. They disappeared as a sea took over. But vent windows were simple, clever, and loved. 27. Rear fender skirts. Some cars wore sleek panels that covered the top of the rear wheels, making the car look longer and smoother. Cadillacs and Buicks especially flaunted them, giving an extra dash of class. By the late 70s, practicality won out and the skirts vanished. But for a time, they made cars look like rolling yachts. 28. Suicide doors. Rear-hinged doors that opened backward made a statement. They were elegant on Lincolns, dramatic on luxury sedans. But they were also dangerous, hence the nickname. By the mid-70s, most were gone. Yet the image of a Lincoln Continental with wide-open suicide doors remains unforgettable. 29. The car phone, prototype years. It wasn't common, but if you saw one, you knew you were looking at wealth. Bulky, crackling, and limited, early car phones were a glimpse of tomorrow. Businessmen showed them off. Families stared in awe. Took decades before cell phones made them real. But in the 70s, the car phone was science fiction come to life. 30. The smell of vinyl and gasoline. Not exactly a feature you could see, but one every driver remembers. Step inside, and the scent of vinyl seats, fresh gasoline, and maybe a hint of motor oil greeted you. It wasn't artificial. It wasn't bottled. It was real. For many, that smell brings back childhood road trips, summer nights at the drive-in, and first dates in Dad's old Chevy. It's a feature no modern car can recreate, and maybe that's why it stays in our memory so strongly. For more nostalgic American stories, hit like, subscribe, and support the American Timeline.